pyramid. The great tower here is where the microphone is. So if you don't project into that, we have an issue. Why is that? Why is that?
Donald, how you doing?
I'm okay. You can hear me?
Yeah, Donald, I'm sorry. You're on the, this is the finance committee meeting and you're going to attend the board meeting and that's probably just going to be just after 10. You're
Okay.
number 4 on the agenda.
Okay, I thought it was 10, but the invitation said 9, so
Okay, I apologize for that. Are you still available just after 10?
I am.
Okay,
We'll
we'll
come
see
back
you then,
then.
Donald.
All right.
Thank you.
Good morning, folks.
All right.
I think we can begin. Bob Butler is done holding court up there. All right, did anybody have anything they wanted to add to the agenda or subtract? I'm good with that too.
Sophie?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering, there are a couple of points related to the audit letters. It might make sense to go over at the committee level, at least briefly, in advance of the major meeting. So I don't know if that makes sense to you or.
Yep, we can do that. Anything else? All right, so everybody got a packet that had pretty charts and graphs in it, tables with information, right? Sorry. When the first page of your background shows the overview of our investments. It shows that we had a total of 3.096 in million in the tip fee asset allocation. And then we had another 1.4 million in our collateral account. So I talked with our investment folks. We continue to be investing the same way. The market is doing exactly what they would predict. They are planning for that prediction. The economy at this point, while rates are coming up pretty rapidly, the spending continues, and so the economy still remains kind of robust. If you look in the news, we see that there are some places predicting a cliff with that. They are expecting bonds to continue to fall for a short amount of time and then to pick up as there is a flight to safety. Does that sound right? Flight to safety. They continue to look at maintaining as much diversity in our portfolio as they can. And they're trying to maintain cash for our needs. When you look at the fact that we've got $583,000 in cash in the tip fee account, and George is recommending that we pull 500,000 out. What that brought to my attention is that George and Mike and I need to be having conversations with the investment banker predicting 9 months ahead if we can. What they're saying is right now, if we are selling before maturity, we are going to lose money. So we want to plan as much as we can so that they simply don't reinvest things that are maturing. So I suggested that we want to keep as much cash liquid in the short term as we possibly can. I'm going to suggest that George can put really nice words to that Pete understands and create timelines for Pete. And we're probably going to ask George to to help facilitate that, to make sure we've got as much cash as we can. So if you look at their benchmark versus our 1-year performance, we are ahead of benchmark, which is good, but it's still a negative number, which is not good. And it's easier to withstand those negative numbers when it's like 25 and 30 million as a treasurer than when it's 3, just saying. So you have just tapped my 5-minute presentation about the investment. Anything that you want to talk about?
Just had a question if I could. How far out are we and how likely is it going to be that we're going to have to sell some of these bond fund investments prior? Well, they're theoretically liquid, but the bond funds could be, I don't know what their maturity ladder looks like, so.
So I have that, I think George also has that if he wants to speak to it while I pull that up.
Yeah, I think, I guess there are 2 occasions. There's a cash collateral account where in the event the MRC ends up the winning bidder and needs to purchase the facility out of receivership in mid-June sometime. So that's one benchmark date. And I'm looking now at the statement as of 4/1. Those were mostly short-term instruments. And I'm trying to look for maturity dates on them, which, we can check up. So that's one piece. The second piece is in the tip fee stabilization fund, where we probably ought to give the instruction to maintain liquidity and not reinvest in the near future. And I believe there are some bonds that are coming due in the second quarter that will cover us, but I need to check that with Peter. And because I don't see that clearly in the statements that we get from First National. So I guess the answer is we got to go back and check with Peter to make sure that they're not reinvesting funds we're going to need in the next 3 to 6 months in either the tip fee account and certainly in the cash collateral account.
I mean, short-term means less than a year, usually.
Yep.
Our time frame is like 7 months.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I understand. Now, one of the things that happened, and it hadn't really been highlighted until this quarter with the interest rate spike, is the old Bangor Savings Bank and people's statements used to give us a whole inventory of all the bond and instrument maturities. And the first statements do not do that. So there's actually information we don't have with First that we used to get from People's and from Bangor Savings. And so that's what I'm looking for right now.
Was there any discussion, George, of putting any of this in money market funds?
Yeah, there's always been a little bit. And
Those rates are going up.
I seem to remember a discussion of this in January, and I don't know if looking at the statement now, I don't see anything that clearly matured that was reinvested. So that's a discussion we have to have to make sure it doesn't happen again. But so I guess I'm looking at the statement now and I don't see the information that I would have liked to have seen with the fixed income instruments listed by maturity date, which is what we used to get.
So
And
let's plan for you and I to get that information from Peter.
Yep.
And then the 3 of us can sit down and if there is a liquidity issue, come up with a plan.
Yeah, let's get it right. Maturity dates by bond or by fixed income investment.
And we can also change that.
Right. I mean, the other question is, we may want to have a board vote on that just because there's an investment policy that's contrary to that about a ladder going out. And probably no.
So, yeah, I think we do want the board to vote on it, but not today. I mean, we haven't seen we haven't given people the policy again to review. We don't have any language for them. I mean, it's kind of
Yeah.
like, let's vote on an amendment to something that some people on the board haven't even seen. So.
Right,
And
so I think
kinda
it's
like
more
that.
interim guidance to maintain required liquidity and then discuss the policy next meeting.
Could the board today simply give, as opposed to amending the policy, simply provide guidance to the manager of the account? And
Yeah.
simply say, given the short term, we'd like to see no matured bonds reinvested other than potentially in money market instruments that are entirely liquid.
Right,
I don't know that the board needs to say that, Rob.
Oh, okay.
Bob, because in the past, you guys
Because he's
have
got
just given
discretion.
us that we've taken the discussion and gone back and given guidance. Unless
maybe
we're taking
that's,
money out. When we take money out, we need a vote.
yeah, maybe that's the advice to the board of the status going forward from the finance committee of what we expect staff to be doing.
Speaking of which, so are we going to need a vote to take the money out to purchase the facility, if that becomes what needs to happen in June? Or has that already been approved?
I don't think that's been approved. So my suggestion is that we're gonna be having a special meeting at the point when we decide we're gonna,
We're ready to pull the trigger.
yeah, I don't want pre-approval to take $1 million out under my signature.
What I can add to that conversation, if I may, is once again, with everything going on with the facility and the process of the sale, mid-May is gonna say a lot. So the money that George and I talked about transferring, what we do in these normal meetings, you'll notice that the cash on hand is the 583,000, and the money that we're requesting to come over, whether it be in the operating account or the contingency account for the waste, we should be covered till June 30th. I purposely figured that out so that we would know where we stand on what direction we're going, without having to deal with moving more money to another direction. So what we move today, or what we ask for the board to approve for moving today, we should be covered till we know what the outcome is. So that's-
All right, so anything else you want to talk about with our investments?
Nope.
George, do you want to review the asset management letter with the group?
Sure, I think there are, the recommendations or the distribution, a transfer of money from the HIPPY stabilization fund to cover the distribution, additional $200,000 from the HIPPY stabilization fund to the contingency account, basically to cover disposal costs associated with bypass, another transfer of $50,000 to the operating account fund expenditure to fund administrative expenses, and that's as anticipated in the budget. And then I think that we have these pending deposits in the event that or to prepare for and serve as the stalking horse, which is a $150,000 deposit with the receiver and an additional $850,000 in an escrow account. Now, arguably, we could say that the cash collateral account could serve as the escrow account, in which case that nothing has to happen, but I haven't been part of those discussions to know if that would be acceptable to the receiver. It ought to be, but this is money. It's $1 million of the $1.3 million in the cash collateral account. If it needs to be transferred, then yeah, those instruments would need to be sold. We just need, and we don't have the details on dates of when this needs to happen, but it's probably something that ought to be pre-authorized because it's just moving money basically from one account that's been an escrow account into another set of escrow account. I think, so those are the recommendations. The financials themselves were updated to reflect the audit from 2020. I think there are a couple things, you know, to go backward, and maybe this is anticipating some other points. If you look at the representation letter for the 2020 audit, it's dated March 22nd, 2022. Of course, the audit period for that audit ended December 31st, 2020. So 14 months went by between the end of the audit period and the receipt of the representation letter and the audit results. And a lot happened in that 14 months. And some of it affected how the MRC does its accounting. I think that there was concern by the auditor of how receivables of tip fees are accounted for as of the end of the period. There was concern of how payables to bypass disposal facilities are accounted for at the end of the period. These are all things that happened or started happening in 2020 and happened throughout 2021 without any guidance from the auditor as to, you know, until 2022. So we kind of did the best we could, and then the auditor had some different thoughts. So those thoughts are now incorporated into the financials that are part of the asset management letter. I think, you know, Michael and I have talked, and we have some new systems for documenting, for example, bypass disposal costs on every invoice, so we know what period they're covered and how to manage them. So hopefully going forward, it'll be a little bit clearer what those numbers are and that they are responsive to what the auditor believes are the needs of the auditor for the audit, and also are consistent with generally accepted accounting principles. So I think, yeah, and so when you look at the financials, you see those changes. You'll also see that now that the 2020 audit is out, and we've done some steps to go in this direction before, but the auditor was very clear to mark the value of the site on the statements down to the value of what was kept after the turnover of the road and the infrastructure for the town of Hamden. And also that the interim loan agreement ought to just be deleted from the balance sheet as an asset rather than just retained with a complete offset. So those two changes have been made in response to the auditor's requests to come into compliance with what the auditors advised us are generally accepted accounting principles. Other than that, I think those are the recommendations and the key points. And you know, we've attempted to update everything to be responsive to the auditor and to put some systems in place going forward so that everything's a little more clearly compatible with the accounting principles that we need to comply with. Questions?
Questions of George?
I was wondering, we're still referring to the fact that we're hoping to recover losses from coastal.
Yeah, I took that out of the management, out of the asset letter. I mean, there may be some hope, but it's not reflected in our financials in any way.
Right, and I appreciate that, but I just, you know, if you're actually going to do anything with regard to pursuing action against coastal, and that's why we continue to have it in there, or just.
I thought I took it all out. So if there's one in there, I must have missed it.
There's two, actually, in the first two bullets on page 2, one in each paragraph. So, I mean, and it does state that they're not reflected in the financials. Those.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to
It's not
disavow and not acknowledge the claims. And that's kind of all it is. And I think it was more important, the last sentence is more important, that they're not in the financials. I mean, technically speaking, Coastal is still the owner of the facility. And I think that some of the cash losses are going to be the offsets against the $1.5 million. So that negotiation isn't complete yet. You know, and so I just, you know, left it in there briefly without any numbers, without a lot of explanation. And at some point, I mean, I mean, at the point of wrote this, hadn't even seen a signed asset purchase agreement. But again, if the MRC ends up the buyer and the price ends up being $1.5 million less certain unreimbursed costs, then those are claims that were offset. So maybe it's, you know, a claim against the bondholders rather than coastal, but I just left it that way to start. So again, maybe it's not the most clear, but that's why it's still there.
So Karen, are you suggesting that we strike it? before
Well,
we
I
publish
was just
this?
wondering, you know, if we had a date in which we thought it was gonna be removed, if we're waiting for something to happen. Like, I mean, I think at one point we had talked about, you know, possibly actually filing suit against Coastal because they really owe
Yeah.
us so much.
Yeah.
So the
I
beauty
think
of
when
that-
if I may, I think when the receivership actually removes the offsets from the control of coastal to the control of the bondholders, then that would be a point in which there would be no more reason to have a claim against coastal.
Let's say the beauty of your position is that we can't do anything like that without you being fully aware and signing for it, so.
Yeah.
It also, when we talked to the auditor, the type of loan that was, it's completely stripped from the books at this point. Because of the type of loan and the position that MRC was in, so our books have completely voided that at this point.
Yeah.
Karen, I don't know the actual legal term. John should be here shortly, but 2 weeks ago, the timeline was coming up where we had to give Coastal another notice of how much they're in default with us, and I revised that number and that notice did, and so that was sent in that notice.
Yeah. That's right.
Revised number,
Mike, you gotta speak up.
where they had a revised number of what they were in default with us.
Yeah, and it's not just the 1.5 million. it was
No.
additional.
It was. No, it was higher than that. So, and that letter just was sent last week, 2 weeks ago.
Mike, you gotta speak up, because if I can't hear you, there's no way they can.
Want me to repeat it?
No.
Okay.
So that's fine. I mean, we'll just be revisiting that and I'm fine to have it in there. Just was asking about what the plan was for the future.
Anything else on George's asset management letter? I will tell you, I just get depressed when I read them because it's getting.
I do have a question or more of a comment. That is, we're continuing to allow for distributions. And I know it ends, I think, in October or November of this year, George.
October.
Yes.
And I think the issue has always been if we don't do the distributions, we're potentially in default.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
And I guess the assumption is if we do that, we're going to lose some people.
so I'm
Someone's gonna
gonna
sue
go, so I'm not gonna talk about who we lose or don't lose, because from that, I don't know. But I can tell you that paying the distribution ultimately is less expensive than defending a lawsuit,
Good point.
period.
No, good point.
Now, the place that's not contractual, I'm taking my Orno hat off because when I put it back on, I'm gonna fight like the Dickens. But the place that's not contractual obligation is to backfill the revenue loss from the commercial towns that MRC MRC borrowed the waste from. The commercial waste from. Pittance of money, but that's not a contractual obligation. So if you're gonna go for money somewhere, that's where I go. Then I would just question, do we really want to have that fight? Because I know at least one town that would have that fight.
I just thought we should discuss it.
folks is also, I help folks all prior to the start of the year to budget, and they budgeted around, you know, the waste, that we do. You know,
Yeah, that's true.
So, you know, like larger towns, it's a big number for it, and budgets already been put the expectation of that.
Yep.
Because the budgets were a little bit different this year because it does cut off on October 1st. So that's an important factor too. We already, you know, almost met. Members have already budgeted around that. Thank you.
All right, we're ready to move on to look at Mike's incredibly well organized, reconciled budget for the first quarter. We are really on target with the budget. When you look at what we're over 25% for the first quarter, we had several annual bills that were due in January and February. So we are doing well.
Just over 8,000 in annual payments have already been made in the budget. We're only up to 27%. So there's a couple of high marks on there, but some of those high marks are only budgeted for the partial year because wait and see what the outcome is come June 30th. The securing of the CRM. The one thing I probably did miss budget on, but I'll keep my eye on it, is travel. You know, a lot of back and forth to the plant. And then, see what that pushes.
Can you not just spend the night down there?
No. So, but other than that, I feel for first quarter, I mean, I know it's in the first quarter that the budget is in good shape. That's a good.
Questions about the budget? Yes, ma'am.
Mike, I was wondering the amount in the bottom line, expense to secure CRM during shutdown. Is that March amount going to be reimbursable? Is that part of the reimbursement?
Part utilities.
Okay, so
So
part of
not
that
the
40.
full amount, because I also put a percentage, so I take a percentage of our legal, of our consultant, of the engineering. You know, anything that we're investing time in due to the facility being shut down, I include in that number, except my own time, but utilities like the electricity and the gas, yes, that will come out of it. And we have our final gas bill, so the gas, we won't be seeing gas bill.
We shut it off.
Yeah, we shut it off so that we could avoid the minimum usage charge.
I'd also like to make a recommendation or a suggestion. Could you change the FY22 proposed budget to approved budget or just FY22
yep.
budget?
I missed that one. That's on me.
Just in the budget column.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Let's not have to go through adoption again. Anything else on the budget? Anything on the financials that we got from our bookkeeper?
Good question. And it's probably been in here in previous ones. I just haven't noticed it. The accounts receivable CRM for 116,000. What is that? Is that the site lease or?
Probably.
But it just seemed kind of low actually for site lease.
Where are you looking?
This is on the statement of financial position under
Account
assets.
1270. Can we get a breakdown for you, Karen, and from the bookkeeper to see what makes that up?
I don't believe it's the lease, but I'll
No.
have to look into it. I don't believe it's because I haven't been sent a
Mike,
lease.
you gotta speak up and talk to Owl, please.
I don't believe it's the lease because I haven't been sending in the lease.
Okay.
So I'll have to check into that.
And I have one other comment on the statement of activities. It seems like They're like in the budget column down in Fund 6100. It's showing the 180,000 under land acquisition, but it really was budgeted. That was the amount that was budgeted in 7501 to secure CRM during shutdown. It just seems like it's kind of in the wrong spot. The totals all work out, but it just seemed like it was not matched up. on that.
I'll have to also look at that.
Yeah.
6,100, you said?
Yeah. But it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Will we try to turn George up volume wise at some point?
Sure, we can try to do that.
Can I ask one more question, please? Do we have an aging on the receivables from vendor dues and from disposal fees? Are they pretty much current?
Yeah,
They are.
everything's looking really good there. There's some corporate like waste management and stuff that just takes time because of the way that it is, but everything looks really well there. What we do is at time of dues, if you're behind on your waste payments, then these the distributions, we'll hold the distributions and just make folks aware that we're holding the distribution waiting on waste. So it's not bad at all.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? George?
Yeah, just to clarify the question on payment for bypass disposal fees. I think there's a slightly new way of doing that. At one point, and I think is because what we have to do is assume that every ton of waste that's been delivered corresponds to a disposal fee being incurred, whether or not it's been invoiced. And whether or not, so you can't just look at the invoices that are out there that haven't been paid yet as payable. It's the invoiced amount that hasn't been paid yet, plus the amount for tonnage delivered that hasn't been invoiced yet. And so that's a bigger number. It's given that the way the data works, the invoices lag the delivery typically by a couple of weeks. So I think we made that change. That was something that came up in the course of the audit as well. And I think now we have a new system for making that clear which invoice covers which time period. And then at the end of the quarter, we know which tons have not yet been invoiced and we can add those to the payable. So that's what we're doing.
Is that a big number, George?
It's a big number. It depends on how the invoices fall. Because if it happened like in first quarter of 2022, if the last invoice was sent out for the first half of March, you could have 2 weeks worth of tonnage for which there's no invoice. And so that could be a couple of thousand tons at 70 or 90 or whatever the number is. It could be it could be a six-figure number. And so that's a significant adjustment. And you'll see that in these financials.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna ask that.
Is that a systems issue or is that, I'd have thought that as soon as we waited and generated the wait ticket.
No, so we get a monthly waste management invoice that we pay. And we get a bi-weekly PERC invoice that we pay. Both
But they
wired.
fall behind.
Yeah.
Well,
You think
and
they
for
don't pay
example-
money or something, George?
Well, for example, we still haven't seen per tons for last week yet, and it's Wednesday, so that sometimes they will not, they'll be behind in the waste tickets, and that'll translate into delays in the invoices. And so, it depends on what the pattern of the flow of documentation is, but what we just have to do is say, our payables cannot depend on what has and has not been invoiced. It ought to depend on what has or has not been delivered. And that's the right way to do it, even if there's no invoice issued yet. And so that was some of the, that's the change in procedure we've done.
Bob, to answer your question, are you talking about the vendor billing us? for
Actually, I'm
those?
talking about both.
Okay, so I'm always a week behind. So
Yeah.
every week I bill and I'm billing for the previous week. But I have to wait so the weight tickets come in and then they have to all, be reconciled, separated, reconciled. And then once we reconcile it, we plug the numbers into a spreadsheet. And then we send that to the CPA to put that into QuickBooks and send invoices out. But we invoice every week. So if I try to do it on Wednesdays or Thursdays and get it to the CPA, and then she probably has it in the mail on Friday or come back Monday. But it's a constant revolving. We have to wait for the processors to set, that's the weight tickets, which usually show up mid.
So presumably when we're back up and running, that delay will disappear.
When we're back up and running, yes, because it'll be entered into, I'm assuming,
Same
our
day,
own
same
system.
process, yeah.
But, I mean, there's hundreds of weight tickets that need to be sorted every week and reconciled.
Are we ready to talk about payables? We have $60,624.20 of payables. $95.18 has already been paid because that keeps Mike's phone on, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to get calls, so keep the phone on. Everything else seemed much in line with what we would expect. I will just draw your attention to Eaton Peabody. Those are expensive bills, just saying.
This legal and consultant went up. Remember, these will be March, and that's when we were doing the APA and also the qualifier bidders document. There was a lot of work done in March on those sides of things. That's where we're at with the plan.
Any questions?
So we'd be recommending it for approval, huh?
That sounds good. Does anybody disagree with that? Tony does not disagree. Let's mark it in the book.
Hey, I was almost on time.
George, was there more that you wanted to talk about in the, about the audit letters? Or did you cover
You're
that? in
muted,
the
George.
Asset management.
He's
You're-
muted.
You're still muted, George.
It's one way to make me talk quickly. Yeah, there were a couple things in the deficiency letter that we didn't address explicitly. I don't know that we need to, but this committee probably ought to hear it. Just there are a couple of changes in terms of distinguishing items that were in the general fund versus the joint venture fund. I think that's been cleaned up at this point. And again, this is the audit from 2020, so things we did a year and a half ago showed up in the audit, and there's some of them are things we're not doing anymore or haven't done for a while. I think and we talked about how to account for payables for disposal, and so we should be fine going forward there. So that's kind of it.
Anything else for finance, or do we get a break? I like breaks. Breaks are good.
Sure.
That said, I think we'll reconvene at 10.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Same Zoom link, Jesse?
Yes.